entertainment. Glad you could join us. Yup.
Pass the mic.
To the table, the stable of people, the killing fables. Yeah, what you came here to do. Pass the mic, break you down like a crossbow from AI. Ooh. Right in your eye. Just Jeff. What's next? Kiss the board off, he rip the pages out your text. Dude Steve, like the movie, the murder shit.
Chop it up.
He shall kill me. Did it, G? Dude, please. The Bruce Lee. The fucking SE. Then there's OZ. You know, none, man. Fucking mute Oz.
Yeah, man, we're going down. That deep down.
Grab your drinks, your paper and pen. Class is down with session.
That deep
Let the
down.
lessons begin.
They don't be knowing nothing about nothing.
Pass the mic.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Atheist Roundtable. I'm just Jeff, here with my lovely co-host, Kay Nebs. Kay, how are you doing?
Good. How are
No,
you?
be quiet. 1 Timothy 2. Yeah, anyway. Go ahead, tell us about your day. I'll give you a pass.
My day's fine. Looking at houses.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yep. Looking at
Any
houses
snow?
to buy. Huh?
You have snow?
Yeah, we have snow.
So you're looking for houses while in snow?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, anyway, make sure you have a garage. So we got a couple things upcoming. Of course, tonight we have Zach. He's a Christian from TikTok. We'll be talking with him. Tomorrow, the 20th, is a very big show. That's our Normalized Atheism show, where we're going to be showcasing some of the smaller atheist channels that are available on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, whatever. The 21st, which will be Monday at 9 p.m., we have a live debate. Is theism rational? And then, of course, on the 22nd, on Monday, we have our normal call-in show from 9 to 11. So be sure to tune in, because I think we're going to have some good phone calls.
Mhm.
And then on the 27th, this is one I've been really looking forward to, is a panel discussion. Is Jesus a myth? Maybe. I don't know. Nobody knows, really. There's no evidence.
True.
And then we are setting up on March 20th. If you haven't seen, there is the Ultimate Debate Championship. Now, I'm sure somebody in the comments can drop a link. There is an application process for that. If you would like to be considered for the Ultimate Debate Championship, the UDC, as it's known, you can apply and be a part. You can be a judge if you'd rather be a judge. We need all of those individuals. That's March 20th, so it's pretty far off, but we're letting you know about it now so that you can get involved. And then we also have a T-Jump debate coming up.
When's that?
The 6th of March.
Okay.
So that's pretty soon. And we got to see T-Jump live, of course, in
Mhm.
Georgia. And T-Jump, what he did admit to, though, is that it's possible that we live in the Matrix. He agreed to that possibility.
It's true.
It's true. So what do we know about our call-in, our guest today?
We know that he's a Christian. And
Yes.
then we have the TikTok.
Yes.
He likes talking about it on TikTok.
Yes. Well, let's bring him in. Zach, how's it going?
Hey.
Hey, how's it going? It's good to
Doing
see
well.
you, Kay, and you, Jeff, and it's a lot of fun. So thanks for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Thanks for being on the show.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are, where people can find you, and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Zach. I am a college student. I'm in my junior year, heading into almost my senior year. So that's exciting. Studying social sciences and education and such. On the philosophy apologetics side, I started this YouTube channel /blog /podcast called Adherent Apologetics a little over a couple years ago now, where I really just talk to people about these big questions. Are just philosophy and theology and biblical studies and all this fun stuff. And I apologize, my light's kind of stupid sometimes, so my light just kind of fell. But hopefully we'll get that recovered. But I do that, and then I also do TikTok, which I guess is how I'm well known now, and just respond to atheists and respond to comments. And yeah, it's a little bit about me. Just love talking about the really big questions in life, and I'm sure we'll do some of that today.
Who's been your favorite guest that you've had on your show on YouTube?
Ooh, that's a good question. So I'd say that my favorite guest is probably, I had Josh Rasmussen on the show. I don't know if guys know who he is, but he's a Christian philosopher, probably the most brilliant Christian philosopher alive today. Like if you're looking for like the best arguments for existence, to look at or Alex Bruce. And I talked to him about actually universal reconciliation, which is interesting. Josh is kind of a hero of mine with all the work he's doing. And then my favorite conversation, that's tricky because there's so many. But yeah, it's just so much fun, so many different people. And what I love about these conversations is there's so many different directions you can take them. And there's so many smart people out there with different views. And that's why it's so fun to talk about these things.
Yeah.
So I think we're going to let Kay take a little one-on-one with you down memory lane and figure out where you came from and what you know. And then
Sounds
you
good.
and I can meet up later. And then after
Let's
that,
do
of
it.
course, maybe if we're lucky, Steve might show up for some Q&A.
Ooh.
Well, I'll miss you, Jeff. Maybe I'll show up.
Hi. How are you?
How's it going? I'm
Good.
good. I'm so happy to be here. So thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So I guess what I want to start with is basically the beginning of your story. You know, so just tell me your story, like what religion you grew up in, if any at all, and how you came to have the faith that you do now.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I grew up in a Christian home. So that was kind of like my like surface level beliefs. Like, you know, when I was 5 or 6 years old, I said the prayer and, you know, I kind of just, and I just, you know, it seemed like the natural thing to do was just be a Christian because that's what my parents were. So I did that right around through my 10th grade year and of high school. And I just kind of was a professing Christian, but I didn't really live or really care that much about it per se. I just kind of did it. And I'd have these like maybe like intense experiences where I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm a Christian. And I kind of just fall back and just live however I wanted to do. So that's a little bit of my story. And then after my sophomore year of high school, I had a friend who passed away in a car crash. And this friend was a devout Christian. I knew him. And it just kind of led me to have this like, I don't know if I'd call it a crisis, but this questioning moment where I was like, well, is this stuff I've heard about God and Christianity and all these things, is it really true? Like, do I really believe that this guy, Nate, is he actually in heaven, or is there a heaven? Is there a God? You know, all of these things. And it sent me in this journey for a couple of years where I kind of just questioned a lot. I didn't really know where to look. So I questioned a lot. I looked at different resources. I spent a lot of time in my junior year of high school looking at answers in Genesis, which is interesting. I'm not a young earth creationist by any means now. It's just something that I was kind of like, I had no idea what I was looking at. And I just kind of wondered. And then heading into my senior year of high school, I have to do these like senior projects for high school where we kind of just work on, we choose a topic and we just pursue it and we read books and interview people and all these really fun things. And I was grateful for it. And I remember going into my senior year, remembering I have all these like giant worldview questions and I'm just not really sure, like, is there a God? Is Christianity true? All these things. So I sent into it and I'm like, I just want to study worldviews and like what's true. So through that, I studied, I started with Christianity, like I'm a Christian. And I started to really believe that Christianity was true. So around the summer before my senior year, I said, like, I really believe this Christianity stuff, gave my life to Christ. And then after that, I kind of just spent more time talking with people that I disagreed with. I talked with a Jewish rabbi in a synagogue, a Muslim, I think it's called an imam, in like their like local mosque, which was a lot of fun. And I actually ended up interviewing Dr. Michael Shermer, very famous skeptic that I'm sure you guys are probably aware of. And just like, well, here's what I think about like God. How do you kind of respond to this? And I remember walking out of the interview being like, I really think Christianity is true. I'm just not satisfied with the answers he's given me. So you can check out, he ended up turning that interview into a podcast.
Wow.
So it's like, if you Google like Skeptic Salon, Zach Seckler, you'll see me, naive little high school senior, interviewing Michael Shermer. And then a few months later, I had this like extra bubble in my project where I was like, just do anything related. And I was like, well, I'll start a blog. So I started an apologetics blog, writing, whatever. And it turned into a YouTube channel, and it's turned into a podcast, and it's grown. And now it's kind of what I do outside of school. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm a Christian now, and I'm pretty convinced of it. And yeah, that's a little bit of my story. So yeah.
That's awesome. So what denomination did you grow up in?
Yeah, that's interesting. So we bounced around through a few different churches. So for the first maybe 7-8 years of my life, I believe it was a non-denominational church. And then we had this couple years where we didn't really go to church. And then we went to Assemblies of God church for a few years, which was really interesting. And then we kind of bounced around again. And then the past few years before I moved out for college, we attended a Christian Missionary Alliance church. So mostly in the evangelical realm, but a lot of different churches. So it was interesting.
Did you end up in the same kind of denomination? Are you evangelical now, or do you subscribe to a particular denomination with how they interpret the Bible? So where are you at right now?
Right. Yeah. So I don't really affiliate. I don't really say oh, I'm a Baptist or a Methodist or Christian, part of the Christian Missionary Alliance. I just consider myself a basic Christian. I think about the basic creeds where it's we believe that Jesus rose from the dead. He's God incarnate. There's the Trinity. Just the basic things like that. And I'm yeah, I just agree to that. And I'm a Christian, and I don't really align with a certain denomination. I mean, I guess I'm a Protestant because I don't align with the Catholic or Orthodox Church, but I don't really fall into a particular denomination. I'm just kind of I'm a Christian, and I go to a Baptist church in Virginia, but then I also go to a Christian Missionary Alliance church when I'm in PA. So just all over the map, but I just consider myself a basic Christian.
Okay. And I guess because I've never heard of the Mission Alliance.
Christian Missionary Alliance. Yeah.
That one. I've never heard of that before. So
yeah.
How do you interpret the Bible? Are you a literal, a literalist? Do you believe that Noah's Ark actually happened, or do you think they're more allegories? How do you fall into that category?
Yeah, this is a really good question. So I appreciate you bringing it up. Mm-hmm. I mean, well, first off, I don't really necessarily subscribe to inerrancy. I don't see a good reason to doubt it. But I'm not necessarily an inerrantist. For me to for Christianity to be true, we just need God to exist and God to have risen Jesus from the dead. And if those things are true, then all the little details we can kind of work out. So I think those two things are true. And then I think the Bible is authoritative, maybe inerrant. I'm not really sure where I stand on that. And then with the literal interpretation versus figurative, you have the flood and stuff, it really just depends on the passage, I think, because obviously it talks about in the Bible, if your hand causes you to sin, you should cut it off. And my hand sins. So if I'm going to interpret every passage literally, I should be cutting off my hand right now if I'm a Christian. So I interpret passages like that figuratively. And it depends on the passage. I would say the ark is a historic event, but I'm not convinced that it has to be a whole earth flood. There's a lot of interesting arguments that it's just a partial part of the earth. I believe that Adam and Eve existed probably out of an evolutionary, maybe special creation. There's a really interesting book by Josh Swamidas on this topic. So it just depends on the topic.
Because I know that there's a whole different when someone says they're a Christian, I can't automatically assume what exactly that means.
Yeah.
It's so different for everybody.
Yeah.
So that was just interesting to learn. So thank you for telling me. Yeah, I think learning about how people interpret the Bible and how they apply that in their life. Someone might say, I think evolution is a farce and I think it's false. And some Christians say, no, I think evolution is totally plausible and can go science can go hand in hand with the Bible. So do you think evolution is legit? Is that something you...
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And I don't really know because I haven't really studied evolution enough. I do know that
I appreciate that answer, actually.
Yeah. So I don't know because it's just as a Christian, I wouldn't have to subscribe to evolution for my worldview to be true. If you're a naturalist, that might be different. But with terms of evolutionary science and such, if I encounter this proof of evolution or like really good evidence, I'd have no problem believing it. I read a book by Josh Swamidas, which said like, here's the naturalistic theory of evolution. Here's how we get like a de novo creation of Adam and Eve. There's no contradiction here. And I kind of agree with Josh there, where I don't see an issue between Christianity and evolution if it's true. I just haven't really looked into the science enough to really like have like an educated position on evolution. I do think there's interesting things like how we share very similar DNA with like, say, like I was almost gonna say a monkey, but I know that's like a common evolutionary myth that like we descend from monkeys. But with like apes, we share a lot of common DNA, and I think that's a very interesting argument for evolution that I find myself somewhat swayed by, but I haven't thought about it enough yet. So
Okay.
I'm open to it.
Okay. And then as far as like, just out of curiosity again, the Big Bang Theory, do you think it's possible that the Big Bang Theory can that coincide with your theology?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So yeah, I think it actually supports theism in general, like causal finitism, there being a first cause. So like I believe that the universe is, I think it's like 13.8 billion years old. There was a big bang. There's this very hot, dense state that's so tiny, and it's in this like fraction of a second where we just don't really know what's going on. So yeah, I have no problem accepting that, and I do think it weighs some evidence towards causal finitism, because I don't think it's just what you'd expect if the universe is past infinite. So yeah, that's just a little bit. So I have no problem with like the Big Bang and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So let me try to, I had another question. I just totally forgot about it.
It's the worst feeling ever when you're interviewing
It is,
someone.
yes. Shoot. Oh gosh, my screen just literally blew up. Okay, there we go.
Oh no.
Okay, so if you believe in certain like scientific, Mersha.
Okay.
He's coming. If you believe in like certain scientific principles and you believe that they don't clash with the Bible, and then you also said that there's certain passages that you don't take literally, but then are there passages in the Bible that you do take literally, and how do you differentiate between what passage should and shouldn't be taken literally?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. It's interesting because like there's a part of this where I just don't know what's to be taken literally and what's to be taken figuratively. I think when it's helpful, like how do we interpret the Bible? I think it's just so helpful to start with the person of Jesus, because like Christianity is centered around Christ. And Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians like 15, if Christ is not risen, our faith is dead and it's pointless. And like I agree with that. Like if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then I wouldn't be a Christian, or at least, that's my beliefs. So I think it just starts with Christ in believing that, he really did rise from the dead. He's God incarnate. And I would think that that's like a literal truth, that Jesus literally rose from the dead. And then there's a lot of passages like, Adam and Eve and there being probably a flood in probably part of the earth. I wouldn't think it's all the earth. And there's a lot of Jesus walking in his ministry. These are things that actually literally happen in history. And then there's certain passages like you have like the parables, or like the first chapter of Genesis, where it's probably, I think, like a figurative. It's not literally saying in 6 exact days God created the earth, but there's deeper things going on. So it just really depends on the passage, I think. So
like, how do you differentiate between what you should and shouldn't? Do you know what I mean? Like, is it just a personal preference, or is there a method to the madness? Like, I'm not trying to say you're mad, but I'm just saying, like, is there a method to like how, when you read, for instance, like a story that I recently remembered in like Judges 19, it's about like this man traveling, and the man there offers his daughters to like rapists,
it's like they cut up in like 12 pieces.
Yeah, 12 pieces and sent out, and then God is like, okay, we'll fight, and then God's like commanding the Israelites for military action and everything that happens after that. So anyway, it's a messed up story. But like, how do you actually differentiate between like, I don't know.
Yeah, like what's real and like what's figurative and what's literal. Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. I think there's a few different things. One is tradition. like if there's like, I think church tradition is a really helpful way to kind of understand like what did Christians believe in the past. Like when you read like Augustine or Origen or Thomas Aquinas or Martin Luther or John Calvin, like what are they thinking about these passages? Are they thinking these are literal events? Are these things that are figurative, or are they debating? Like take like the millennium. Is the millennium literal or is it figurative? Well, it depends on who you read. So I think tradition is good, a really important thing. Like there's a constant tradition of throughout like all the church fathers that this thing is like a literal truth. Then I think that's a really good reason, at least that I'd place my belief that that's true. And it's the same if like if it's a constant like figurative tradition, then I'd believe what the church fathers would believe most likely, just following in tradition in a sense with all these great scholars over time. With regards to like the Judges passages that you just bring up, yeah, it's a really confusing passage, and it's like, what's going on here? And I haven't studied it in depth, but I always just start with the person of Jesus. I'm like, okay, so we have God incarnate in the person of Jesus. If there's anyone in the world we should trust, if he rose from the dead, it's this guy. He's God. And he says, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think when I look at like maybe these Old Testament passages, like what's going on here, I always start with God says, love your neighbor as yourself. He's just, and starting with like, what would Jesus do in these passages? So a little bit, but my theology is really developing here. It's not something I've put a lot of thought into. So it's something that's a work in progress. I'm definitely not like having a convicted opinion on these passages yet.
For sure. Yeah. I think the confusing part for me is there's God and there's Jesus, and Jesus is God incarnate, as you've said. So why are they kind of at odds with each other? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
that's been a struggle for me. It was a struggle for me when I was a Christian of like, okay, the Old Testament is so heinous, and God is, commanding, certain armies to do certain things, or he's condoning certain things, or saying things that don't really make sense morality wise in today's world. But then Jesus seems to come along, who is also God. Like, why aren't they this? Like, why isn't there? So I guess, can you explain that to me?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because it's been something that's been thought about for like millennia. There's been a lot of Christians who are like, what's going on here? So like, once again, I think it's so helpful to start with the person of Christ. Like, I think that God is perfect. And you look at like the person of Christ, and it really seems like that's the case, where there's really a perfect God. So when I look at like these Old Testament passages and I'm like, what's going on here? Well, I think it just depends on your interpretation. So my kind of idea is I would rule out any interpretation that would violate God being morally perfect. So if there's a thing where it's like, where you look at this and there's like, it's something that only someone evil would do, well, I'd say, well, then it wouldn't have been God that did that, because God is morally perfect. He'll only do things that are morally good. And I think there's interesting arguments in natural theology that we can talk about there. So with like these passages in the Old Testament where like, what's going on, I just always think, well, God's perfect. So if my interpretation has something happening where God is doing something immoral, well, then I'd say that's not actually God. Greg Boyd would have like a very non-traditional kind of like approach to these things, which would get around a lot of these Old Testament objections, where it's like, well, God commanded this group to die, or commands this in the Old Testament. And if you're taking like Greg Boyd's approach, there's an interesting debate between him and Paul Copan on this, and Unbelievable. Well, it's not really God doing this. It's just the Israelis thinking that it's God. And that's kind of why you see these things in the Old Testament and such. So I hope that helps. It's a really hard topic to kind of go through. And I know I'm just kind of like flying through things here.
No, it's totally fine, for sure. Thank you so much for answering all of my questions. Again, I appreciate you being on here. And I think we're going to hand this next segment over to Just Jeff, the atheist.
Sounds good. What's up, Jeff?
How's it going?
Good, man. How are you?
Steve's been drinking and he's running the show tonight, so you'll have to apologize if there's any mess ups.
It happens.
But,
it's all good.
Yeah. But anyway, so how are you feeling?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm trying to talk to you and get my light fixed at the same time, and I've realized I need to buy a new lighting light. But yeah, man, it's a great day. So
we talked about apologetics a little. Is there an apologetics argument that you've heard that just makes you go like, oh? Like that's such a
Oh,
terrible
yeah.
argument.
Yeah. I was thinking about this the other day. There's a few. One of them is like the whole like look at the trees thing. Just look at the trees. It's obvious. I think there's interesting argument for like beauty. But like something like that seems a little silly. Like, you know, some theists will be like, well, atheists just want to sin. I don't think that's a very good argument at all. You can't prove that God doesn't exist. Not a fan of that. So there's a handful. There's definitely some. You know, there's a lot of people who say a lot of things, and there's some things I'm definitely not fond of.
So why do you think that God needs apologetics?
Well, I don't think he does. I think that most studies would show that like a belief in God is intuitive across most of all people across of all history. And most of these people believed in God without any need for apologetics. So I don't think God needs apologetics because I think most people believe in God without apologetics. Like I think about like my own father or my sister or a lot of my friends that believe in God. They've never heard of apologetics and they believe in God. I know skeptics, or maybe not skeptics, but people who weren't Christians who come to believe in God totally apart from apologetics. I just don't think God needs apologetics. And then, you know, it's just philosophy, like thinking about these big questions and something we've done for millennia. So, yeah.
Well, why do you think then that Christianity needs apologetics?
Well, once again, I'd be very hesitant to say Christianity needs apologetics. I'd say there's people that find apologetics helpful because I think that for a lot of people, you know, they want the philosophical reasons to believe in God or maybe the historic reasons to believe that Jesus rose from the dead. So, of course, for some people, they may really need it. But like for the vast majority of people over time, I don't think they need it. I think it's something that's really helpful. You know, it talks about in the book of Matthew, love the God with all your heart, your soul, and mind. And I think apologetics is loving your God with all of your mind. So, yeah.
There's a quote from St. Augustine that I always like to reference because it's one of my favorite quotes. And
Okay.
it's the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose and it will defend itself.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that it's interesting to me that a religion that is true would need apologetics. Like there's not evolutionary apologetics. There's not medicine apologetics. You know, there's not that type of defense. It's a find the truth and then support the truth kind of argument. So that's my take on apologetics. It should not exist.
Right. Okay. I hope this lighting's a little bit better. My light
That was
is
fine.
being so I apologize for everyone listening. My lighting shouldn't be this bad, but I need to buy a new light. Well, okay, so I think it comes down to what is apologetics? I think it's just defending the truth of Christianity. That's when I think of apologetics, it's just defending the truth. So I would say that there's also people defending the truth of, say, evolution or defending the truth that the earth is 13.8 billion years old. There's people defending the truth that we should be Republicans or Democrats. There's apologists for everything. And then Augustine's interesting. Have you ever read Augustine, Jeff? I'm curious.
Some, not all. I mean, I have one book.
Mm-hmm. So I read Confessions over the summer by Augustine. I'm glad you brought him up because he brings quotes like that true in there because I think he's right. But he also spends a lot of time defending certain beliefs. So like, I think when Augustine's writing this thing, he's not saying, well, we shouldn't do any argumentation. He's just kind of saying a quote here. I have to read it in context. I don't know exactly what it is, but Augustine doesn't defend anything, but says don't defend anything. But then he defends a bunch of things and say confessions, he'd be a hypocrite. So sorry, a couple of things there.
I think what he's saying is that you don't need to physically defend something, or you shouldn't have to force it onto people. Like, I think we would both agree that indoctrination is wrong, that, you know, a person should be able to develop their own mindset when it comes to a religion. So that would be one way, the truth they would find, versus saying, hey, this religion is the correct religion. Let the truth be there and then let people find it on their own when it's made evident. We also don't need to, you know, fight wars over forcing people to not, you know, like blasphemy laws and things like that, where you're not allowed to criticize different thought processes or religions. I think that's another way that we're protecting a specific belief system and giving it unnecessary protection. That's I think when I interpret what he's saying with what else he said in that book, that's kind of what I get from the gist of it.
Yeah, well, that specific quote, I just have to read it in context because I know Augustine spends a lot of time defending a lot of things. So I don't think Augustine's saying don't defend anything. So I just have to look at that quote in context, and I don't have that on me. So
I think it's just the way that it's defended. So like you talked about answers in Genesis. and Ken
Mhm.
Ham. Ken Ham will defend a young Earth creationist biblical literal flood event, no matter what. Like, no matter what the evidence shows, no matter what the data is, he's looking for a specific outcome rather
Yeah.
than seeking truth and letting that be known. He's manipulating what he can, and I think that's pretty evident with the picking and choosing of events that he has. I mean, for such an event that is just the amount of evidence that's lacking is insane. So I think that, even modern Christians right now, I don't think that the majority believe that it's a literal event, that it is more a figurative event. But that's a whole, other thing on its own. But, Ken Ham is not defending the truth. He's defending what he believes to be the truth. But if he were to let it be under normal scrutiny, it doesn't hold up. If you were to release if he releases what he found to the scientific community, which he has, it gets laughed. It doesn't hold up. It doesn't hold water. Literally.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with a lot of what you're saying. I don't really know about like Ken Ham specifically because I haven't spent too much time. I mean, I looked at Answers in Genesis
That's
5 years ago now, but I haven't thought about it too much since then. But I'd agree with you. Like, truth is true, and we should pursue what's true, and we shouldn't be afraid to ask questions, and we shouldn't be afraid to do things like that. And I think I'd totally be on the same page as you. Is that like I'm open to my arguments being wrong or new arguments or things like that. So I'd agree. Like, we should just pursue what's true, even if it leads to a conclusion that we don't like. So yeah, I think we're on the same page here.
So what do you think? If the Bible is God's word and it is the most dire message any human will ever get, why leave it up to interpretation, to poems, to this very non-specific, maybe literal, maybe not literal book, rather than something that's more impactful and apparent?
So this is interesting. I appreciate your question. I think first off, like, what does it mean to be a Christian? I think it's helpful to start because I just think of like a Christian as someone who believes in the creeds. You have like, if you read like maybe like the Apostles' Creed or the Nicene Creed, we have things like a belief in like the Trinity and the resurrection of Christ and things like that. And if you believe that, you're a Christian. If you confess with your mouth Jesus is the Lord and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you're saved. So we have this, like, I think Christianity is very simple in terms of like, what does it mean to be a Christian? You just, all you have to do is confess that Jesus is the Lord of your life and believe that he rose from the dead. And then we have all these other secondary questions with regards to like, how do we interpret the Bible? Like, what's figurative, what's literal, the poems and the Psalms and the Proverbs. And we also have like the Gospels and Paul's letters and like, what's going on here? I think these are all secondary questions because, at least from like my perspective, I'm like, okay, so two things need to be true for Christianity to be true. One, God exists. Two, Jesus rose from the dead. If those two things are true, Christianity is true. You look at like 1 Corinthians 15. And then all these other secondary questions are secondary questions. They don't really affect either God existing or Jesus rising from the dead. So I always like to start with like the big picture, like what does it mean for this religion to be true? And then we can kind of work our things through the secondary after we've kind of weaved through those. So maybe that helps.
So you've decided that there are certain parts of the Bible that are literal, that if you take literally, then point towards Christianity being exclusive to needing the understanding of salvation through what you just explained.
Yeah, I think they John 14:6, Jesus says, in the way, the truth, and life, no one comes to the Father except through me. I believe that's true.
So how did you determine those are literal and other things are not literal?
Well, I think I was talking with Kay earlier. It's just going to depend on the passage. If you look at like John 14, it's Jesus speaking. Like if you look at like maybe like a parable, it's pretty obvious when Jesus introduces a parable, and Bible scholars can say, hey, this is a parable versus something Jesus is saying. There's debate on these things, but
But why give it such a, why have parables in a message that is the most important, dire message for a human being, and you slide over a page that's got parables and poems and maybe literal, maybe not literal? It seems like God's playing games.
Well, okay, there's a few things here. I would say, like, once again here, like, the Bible is, so we have God's message. The gospel is the most important thing. And what is the gospel? It's God raised Jesus from the dead. And that's the most important thing. And I think that's very, very clear in the Bible. We have all these secondary things where it's like, how do we interpret Romans 9? Or like, what's going on in the Genesis creation accounts? And there's mysteries and there's questions. We can debate and talk about these things because these things don't affect the things that decide whether Christianity is true or not. Because I just look at these issues, Jeff, and I hope you understand where I'm coming from. And I'm like, these things are just secondary. I think about like what makes Christianity true or not. It's God existing and Jesus rising from the dead. And those are the two things, like as a Christian and a person who loves philosophy and apologetics, those are the two questions I'm most concerned about. Yeah.
So I asked a question on my TikTok pretty recently, and I just made a video and I said, hey, for Christians, respond to this video and tell me what is required for salvation. I totaled it up. I got about 130 unique answers to that question. So anything from what you said to is a baptism required or not? Are good works evident of being saved? All of these people using biblical references had a different understanding of a very foundationally basic question about Christianity, which is what is required for salvation. If we can't, as a entire species, understand at least what is required from salvation from the same book, then I think the book has failed in delivering its message.
Okay. So this is interesting. So I haven't looked at like this TikTok and all these responses, but I think you're going to hear a lot of differences, but you're also going to hear a lot of similar things. You look at like, what do the creeds say? I'm just so interested in what do the creeds say about Christianity? Like, just for like a aside here, like an analogy, let's talk about the age of the earth for a second. Most people believe that the earth is 13.8 billion years old. And I'd agree with that. But then there's going to be people that are going to say maybe give or take plus a million or minus a million. They don't really know exactly how old the earth is. Should we discard the entire belief that the earth is around 13.8 billion years old because there's disagreement on the exact age? I don't think we should. In the same way with the gospel message, maybe there's people that differ on maybe minor details surrounding these things, but we shouldn't discard the entire message because there's minor disagreements. We can focus on like what's the core of what's true. And I think if you read the gospels, it's talking about this person named Jesus and committing your life to him and following him. So yeah, I just don't think disagreement's a good reason to discard the belief because it doesn't really challenge God existing or Jesus rising from the dead. At least
if we disagree on the age of whatever and we're wrong, not that big of a deal. But if we don't understand this salvation, then we end up in hell. We miss out on heaven.
I would push back on that. I don't think that it comes down to just like, all right, so I don't think we're gonna get to the pearly gates and it's gonna be like, well, Zach, you committed your life to me, you followed me, but you didn't have X belief. You didn't believe that, I don't know, Romans 9 was to be taken into Calvinist perspective. Therefore, you're not going to heaven. Like, I don't think that's how that works. You talk about the gospel. It's not about doing works or having these proper beliefs.
We're just talking the minimum requirements. Ooh, okay. That means we're getting close to Q&A. So it's a minimum.
Can I ask you a question, Jeff?
Yeah, go ahead.
So, like, as a Christian, I think about like two major things: one, God existing; two, Jesus rising from the dead. With your idea of there like being disagreements of the Gospels, which of these two ideas does this push back on and say, well, we have good reason to doubt one of these two because of these disagreements?
I do not have any reason to believe or not believe in the existence of a God. I am fairly confident to a high degree that the God of the Bible is false.
Okay.
And I'm not convinced that Jesus existed or didn't exist. I don't have enough information to go either way.
Okay.
But I find it very problematic. There's a few issues I have with the creation story.
Jeff, just to be clear here, to push back a little bit more. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I asked you talked about a lot about these disagreements on like what is the basics of the gospel message. To be a Christian, like two things have to be true. God exists and Jesus rose from the dead. If those things are true, Christianity is true. And we could talk about like what interpretation is true, but if those things are true, Christianity is true. What should those two, does there being disagreements in the gospels affect?
About the gospel message. The gospels are the only information I have to go off of to believe in the resurrection story and Paul. So I don't have a whole lot to make a determination on that. And then it's evident to me that the Bible itself is not a good source of truth. So therefore, I doubt the gospel message as well. So the only evidence that I have to support the Jesus resurrection story is in question.
Let me rephrase my question. I apologize. You didn't talk about disagreements in the Gospels, which is interesting. You talked about disagreements among Christians about what does it mean to be a Christian.
Sure.
How do these disagreements among Christians change or give reason to doubt either God existing or Jesus rising from the dead?
So it would doubt. It doesn't make a difference to the Jesus rising to the dead argument. It would make a difference to God existing. And the reason I would say that is the fact that this all-loving, all-powerful, all-knowing God was unable to give us an unmolested word from his mouth to my brain about those things in a clear message. It should be clear to any human being on this planet who picks up that book what is required for salvation. It shouldn't be this debate. The fact that there's so much debate, so many different denominations, so many different people that don't understand the message, it leads me to believe that there is either no messenger or this messenger is faulty and didn't do a good job.
Right. So I would think that like if God exists, he's perfect. So I think it'd be, if anything, it'd give a reason to doubt that there being a God in the first place. Religious disagreements, an interesting article. It's time for Q&A, which is so sad. But one last thought I'll say is I don't think I grant Jeff's personal kind of like he thinks that there's all this disagreement. But if you look across like all of history, belief in God is very intuitive. Most people have believed in God over all history across all
You
cultures.
want to know why I think that is?
Why?
So when you were younger as a child, you looked up to your parent, a larger version of yourself that took care of you, and it was a comforting thought. Therefore, you built a neural network around that, and having that comfort helps you deal with life. So as you get older, it's a comforting thought to think of something like yourself, but larger and powerful and in charge. That is why God has not escaped the human figure. That's why we still think of God as a larger human being, a man that is there to take care of you. I would think that if a being of any sort was capable of creating the world, creating this universe, he would, or probably not have a gender, and
I agree.
probably not.
God's not a male or female.
Yeah, and probably not human form. We were not built in the image of a god. This is a see there that. So it has been the thought of many people that there's this big man in the sky that takes care of us. And, that's a comforting thought. I think it's very evolutionary, very biologically explained in that experience. So that is why. I mean, and again, you look across generations and hundreds of years of history. We live in the information age. I can look up anything in a moment's notice. And I have a whole book about different gods from different places. And, they're all fantastic stories that are colorful and they've been retold for millennia. But they're not true. Like the vast majority of all these stories have been false over time. They die off in time.
Oh my gosh, you gave me a really interesting idea. You're familiar with C.S. Lewis, right?
Yes, the writer.
Yeah, that's a silly question. C.S. Lewis loved these myths. He loved like religious myths and like kind of what's going on here. And it gave him like a similar barrier to you, where he's kind of like, well, I have all these myths. Why believe Christianity is true? Why isn't it just another myth? He's talking with, I believe, G.K. Chesterton, and what he says is he realized that all these myths weren't false. It's just they only gave a little bit of a picture to what is actually the truth. So there was a little bit of truth in all these myths that pointed to the actual truth in Christianity. But I know we're going to Q&A. So I just wanted to leave that because I thought about C.S. Lewis and I'm writing a thesis on him. So yeah.
Yeah, we can transition to Q's and A's. Have you personally felt the cold hands of a murder shed?
I have not, but I'm not looking forward to it.
Oh, well, how's it going, everybody? So when I was a child, a young baby boy, I was hanging out with a few of my pals, and a bald man came across us. And we started teasing him pretty hard, giving him a razzing for his, shiny scalp there. But all of a sudden, a bear came out of nowhere and started mauling all the kids. Well, by the time it got to me, it was pretty tired, so I was able to wrestle it to the ground, and I now have a bearskin rug. How's it going, everybody? Hey, Zach, Jeff, Kay.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you again. We did get to meet each other a little bit back. Jeff, keep yourself together. In any case, I do have some questions for you. You're actually doing a fantastic job. Great job.
You're too kind. Jeff was over there grilling me. So yeah.
Well, that's what Jeff does.
I appreciate it.
actually-
It's so fun to talk about these things.
Usually
you ever
people
heard of
pay me
the-
when they get drilled.
The big green egg.
I have not.
That's Jeff's new nickname. So Atheist Cats has a question. One simple question. Is there evidence outside of the Bible of Jesus being resurrected? Primary at the time period. Preferred.
Yeah, this is interesting.
No.
So I'm thinking about outside of the Bible, you're referring to like extra biblical references to like Jesus rising from the dead.
Or any of the events, like the raising of bodies, the darkness of the sky, the temple shroud being ripped.
Okay. So I haven't read enough on this topic, but I do know there's a few different like mentions to Jesus. You have Josephus in about I think it's like 85-ish AD, who talks about a person named Jesus walking around, and the passage was corrupted to some degree, but most historians would agree, though it's debated. It is a historical truth. There's Tacitus, which is around.
But none of those are primary.
Well,
They didn't happen during the time of Jesus. Is like nobody during that time wrote it down. Like this darkness in the sky, the bodies raising from the dead, Jesus dying, the temple, the earthquakes. Nobody mentioned any of those during the time.
Well, I would say that, I mean, we could debate who wrote the Gospels, but I'd say the Gospels wrote these things down. So I would
Yeah,
push back
that's what
on
we're saying.
that.
Yeah, nobody else though wrote it down.
Well,
Just
I
the
wonder, could you witness the resurrection of Jesus Christ and be a neutral observer to this question? Like, if you have this person who's walking around Galilee prophesying, saying, I'm going to rise from the dead, I'm going to rise from the dead, he's doing all these miracles, how could you be neutral? Like, you see this happen and you see him rise from the dead. How could you just be neutral on that? I don't understand that. Like, if you see him
Yeah,
rise
you
from the
write it
dead,
down.
I think you
Surely
become a
somebody
Christian
would
then.
write it down.
Now,
Well, I think that's why you have the Gospels.
Zach, that's actually a really great question, and the only real answer that I have for that is it depends on what kind of mushrooms I was eating before I saw them.
Hey Zach, do you know what Josephus's father did for a living?
I'm not familiar.
He was a high priest in Galilee during the time of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
He never said anything to his son about this event.
Well, I kind of wonder if that's an argument from silence, because we can't just say X didn't say Y. If we look
Oh,
at
I'm not. I
ancient-
know it is, but don't you think that if someone died, there was earthquakes, the shattering event where the things ripped, there's darkness over the sky abnormally, there's earthquakes and bodies coming out of the ground, you might say, "Hey, son, you're a historian. You wrote 2 volumes about me." None of those volumes did he ever mention anything about this, and he was alive during the time of Jesus at the event site.
Right. Well, there's an
It's
interesting
odd.
debate.
It's just odd.
There's an interesting debate between Inspiring Philosophy and Jim Maher's on the Gospel. Jim Maher's on the Gospel about this topic, and Jim brings up a lot of points that you are, Jeff. And IP brings up all these different things in history where we have historians not recording seemingly major events. So it's not an anomaly in history with Josephus. So I think if we're going to use
But
this
this
kind of
is God.
skepticism,
This
I
is
think
the
we'd have to
one true
disagree.
God.
We'd have to like disregard things like Caesar being murdered in the Senate, and all kinds of things, because these authors recording the events, they often skip out on very big details. So I just don't see a lot of legs to this argument, at least from my perspective.
I mean, if you were,
I've got
Oh,
a
go.
question from Samuel Doolittle. How do you deal with the contradictions in the gospel stories and the concerns about the authors or possible forgeries? Kind of ties
Okay,
into what
so-
we were just talking about.
Yeah, there's a few things here. Can you bring? Is it possible to bring the question back up? Because there's like a few different things there that I wanted to keep track of. If not, it's okay. I can kind of go offhand.
No, that is
so-
definitely something we can resurrect that question. No problem. It might
Jesus
take 3
rose from the dead.
days.
Well, it took you like 3 seconds, so I'll give you that. How do you deal with contradictions in the Gospels? There's definitely discrepancies in the Gospel. You know, you look at like how many people are at the tomb. One Gospel says 2, one Gospel says 1, another one says just the women. And I mean, there's a lot of work that's been done on these things, and maybe there's a contradiction. It just, if there is, it doesn't bother me, because when you look at these things, J. Warner Wallace wrote a book called Cold Case of Christianity, and he talks about like these discrepancies are exactly what you'd expect if people are actually trying to write down what they saw. It seems like when they have these discrepancies, like they're just trying to make a little huddle and get this like Christianity thing off the leg. They try to agree with each other exactly like that. It just seems like that'd make more sense if they're just trying to make this conspiracy theory. So I think that The differences actually show that these people are actually trying to write down what they believed happened. What else was there? Conspiracies, forgeries. Well, I think
Possible
like the long ending of Mark, we can find these things. Textual criticism is amazing what we can do. So we can find things like the long ending of Mark, where it's like that thing in First John that was added in like the 18th century. So I don't know. Textual criticism is amazing, and we can kind of look at these things.
Witterschniz would like to know, if it's true, then why wouldn't God make the story and message more evident? Something that transcends language, education, and cultural barriers.
Barriers. Well, I would think it does. If you look at, there's Christians all around the world today, and
There's Muslims everywhere.
You're right.
There's Scientologists everywhere.
Yeah, you're right.
Mormons have made it to Australia.
Yeah,
Jeff, let him answer the question.
I just
Don't
don't see.
overtalk.
Okay,
I don't see the issue with what Jeff is saying here, because like a belief in God has transcended language, education, cultural barriers. It's something common across all of people, across all of time. It's a very basic belief. We didn't get into Reformed epistemology, but I'm kind of a fan of properly basic beliefs. So I'd say the God belief is intuitive, something that's happened across all barriers and over time. And the Christian message, you could say, is just the same, and you could bring up these different religions, and that's fine. Like for the sake of this question, I think that there being Christians from all these different cultures and educational backgrounds and all around the world, it just shows that Christianity has transcended cultures. It's not limited to select few of a certain culture. You can say the same thing about Islam, and that's fine, because I think for the sake of this question and argument, it doesn't have to do all the work to show that all these other things are just phony for this particular question.
Well, actually, this might be a good follow-up question to that. Ronald is wondering, is there anyone who heard about Jesus on their own without hearing it from someone else or from the Bible?
This is really good. I don't have sources. I can't direct you to these things, but we hear a lot of stories about Muslims who live in maybe like very, very highly Muslim cultures, either never heard of Jesus or maybe know of Christianity. Like we think of like maybe like some like polytheistic religion that I have no idea what I'm talking about. And these people will have these like vivid dreams of people like Jesus. So I would think that maybe that would grant some weight to this. You can talk about other people who maybe have had like visions or dreams and such. So I think that this is definitely something that's totally possible that could have happened. But even if it didn't, I don't really see how it'd be an objection to Christianity. So yeah.
Got to say, Zach, I appreciate your expedience with these questions. We got a lot of them, and I know we're kind of limited on time. So, Atheist Cats is wondering, why is the word of God limited to knowledge that only those in religion and time would know?
Yeah. So why is the word of God limited? Well, I think we talked about this idea of general versus special revelation. It's a part of Christian theology. There is this special revelation. It's the gospel that we're called to share throughout all the earth. And that's something that, we have to share. It's not something that people don't know, like the parables of Jesus just from being born. But then I do also think we have this general revelation, this general intuition that certain things like say murder, rape, or all horrific things are actually just wrong. I think that, these basic things like love your neighbors yourself and such, things that just seem intuitively obvious to most people across all times and all ages. So yeah.
And I got two more questions. Actually, I did have a question in there that I'd like to address real quick. What do you think of Just Jeff's shirt?
Cancel religion. That's interesting. I mean, obviously I'm a Christian, so I disagree. But it's a cool design.
You don't need religion.
I mean, of course you don't need it. It's not about whether we need it or not. It's just about whether it's true or not. So
Well, you could believe in Jesus without a religion.
Sure, but I mean, I'm just interested in what's true.
I can also poop without a toilet.
It's cool.
Brother John, was Matthew, Mark, and Luke hiding in the bushes, watching the women at the tomb? How come they don't mention each other being there?
Yeah. So Mark's not one of the 12 disciples. So Mark wasn't there. If you read like Papias, he talks about Mark getting his gospel from Peter. So Mark probably wasn't there. The same thing can be said about Luke. You read Luke 1-4, it talks about him compiling these things, like looking at interviewing people, comparing things like that. And that's how he gets his gospel account. So Luke probably wasn't there. The interesting one is Matthew. And I mean, I don't know, maybe Matthew just wasn't there until afterwards. These gospels aren't written like 30 seconds after the event. They're written decades after these events happened. So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit. I don't know exactly what this question is getting at. But yeah, I hope that helps.
It's just like the verses where like Jesus is praying in a room by himself to God. So it's like when Jesus was talking to himself in a room, who was sitting there writing it down?
Well, isn't it possible? Like these things aren't written right away. Like you don't believe the Gospels were written in like 34 AD. So isn't it totally possible that Jesus told people? Well, couldn't Jesus have just told them, "Hey, this event happened," and then they wrote about that event later?
Could have, but did that happen? It's weird the way it's written because most of those Gospels came after his death.
Well,
So
all of them came after his death. Jesus died in like 33 AD. The Gospels weren't written until the 50s or 60s or 70s. So
did they come back and were like, "Hey, by the way, on Tuesday I was praying to myself," and then
couldn't Jesus have actually had the event happen? And a little bit later, Peter's like, "Hey, what were you doing?" He's like, "Oh, I was just praying up there." And he's like, "Okay." And then when Peter's telling Mark his gospel, then Peter just tells him what happened, and Mark writes it down. Like, I just don't really see the issue there.
It's just weird.
Well, I would push back because there's all quantum mechanics is weird, but quantum mechanics is real. Like just because something's weird doesn't mean it's not true.
Well, these are human activities, not qubits.
It seems a little bit like special pleading to me. Like there's all kinds of weird things in the world that have happened. And just because something's weird doesn't mean we should discard it, because if it's weird,
it can be suspect, it can be a little suspect.
Yeah. That's fine.
I'll tell you what, I was called weird all throughout my childhood, and I'm glad that I was not discarded.
Me too, Steve.
I got a question from Bryce Aroni in the chat.
Pronounce it correctly.
Bryce. I thought that was Bryce Aroni.
No. Read ahead. I'm ready.
Oh, well, I'm contractually obligated to mispronounce at least one word.
You already mispronounced something.
You know what, Jeff? Don't test me. I've been in your attic before, bud.
It's true.
Shout out to Bryce and the EA show. Do you believe in Occam's razor? What explanation for a God-inspired work having contradictions in simplest?
Bryce,
simplest. See, I got one word wrong, Jeff. Just not the one you thought.
I would say that Occam's razor is don't multiply causes beyond necessity. So I don't know exactly how that. We talk about it a lot with like natural theology and like what is the foundation necessary being da da da. So I don't know how exactly that would apply to the Bible having supposed contradictions, because like it doesn't seem like it does any work for me to say that the Bible has contradictions. Like all kinds of historical documents may have contradictions. Just because there is seeming discrepancies and maybe contradictions doesn't change whether something's true or not. It just says people were just trying to write down what they said, what they believed happened, and these people had different ideas of what happened. It doesn't mean that the event didn't happen overall. And with Occam's razor, just say, if you want to apply this like to the arguments for like what is the necessary foundation, I think there's really good reasons to use Occam's razor to kind of throw a lot of the naturalistic explanations is less plausible than the theistic one. So yeah.
But do you think that like other religions that have existed before Christianity were wrong?
Well, I mean, if they deny Jesus rising from the dead, then I would say that they didn't get the full picture. But I mean, there's all kinds of false things that have some true components into them.
But do you think that the majority of world religions are false?
Well, I mean, in terms of like overall being like the true worldview, yes, I think they all have true components into them. I'm kind of a fan of what Lewis said that I talked about earlier.
But those religions aren't going to lead us to salvation.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life." So I think salvation comes through Christ.
So why would his book be the same as everybody else's book when it comes to contradictions, problems, understanding all these things? It's no different than a book that you just admitted is incorrect.
Because Jesus rose from the dead. Like as a Christian, it comes down to, did God exist? Did Jesus rise from the dead? And did Jesus rise from the dead is a separate question than why are there discrepancies in the Gospels? Like I just like when I just want to say, like when I'm getting to like my overall big picture as a Christian, like what do I believe? I believe two very, very important things. One, that God exists. God is a necessary mind that creates the universe. Most atheistic philosophers would agree that there's a necessary thing that comes through the universe. They just disagree that it's a mind. So there's that. And then 2, Jesus rose from the dead. And maybe there's contradictions. Maybe there's things in the Old Testament we don't understand. And there's a lot of things in the Old Testament I don't understand. And there's seeming discrepancies which don't make sense to me, but they don't change whether Jesus rose from the dead or not. So yeah.
And Bryce was wondering, what is the best explanation? So do you have like a number one quick best explanation?
The best explanation for discrepancies in the Gospels?
Yeah.
I would highly recommend Jay Warner Wallace does a little bit of work in this in Cold Case Christianity, getting Kindle for like $2. And he talks about like, why are these discrepancies? I think there's discrepancies because these people are actually trying to write down what they actually saw. Like, I think that if they were all the same, it'd sound like they're just trying to tell the same story. But the fact that are these discrepancies shows that these people are actually trying to write down what they believe actually happened in reality.
Sounds
Fair
good.
enough.
And that is all the questions that I have for today. Thanks for stopping by the Murder Shed, where answers get questioned. All right, Cousin Tony, here you go. Gosh, your skin and bones. So hungry, I'm sure. Oh.
Well. It's
Here
that
we
time
are.
of the night.
What a great conversation. Thank you so much for being on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been so much fun to talk about these things. And Jeff for pushing back and holding my toes to the fire. It's always so much fun to talk about these big questions because hopefully, we're all just pursuing truth.
Yeah, for sure.
So just a reminder, we got a couple shows this weekend. We have one tomorrow on the 20th, and we have our call-in show on the 21st. So tomorrow, the 20th, is a big show. There's going to be a lot of different faces showing up as we have a lot of small atheist creators that are going to be featured so that we can get some exposure to their smaller accounts. So be sure to tune in for that. And Kay, do you have anything to add? If not, send us off.
I was just going to allow Zach to go ahead and plug all your stuff. Give us your TikTok, your YouTube, your podcast, everything where people can find you to watch your content.
Yeah, you're so nice. Can I give just like very briefly like a couple like very brief closing thoughts before I get plug my content? Sure. Awesome. Thank you. So thank you so much for having me on. It's been so much fun to talk with Steve and Kay and Jeff. I enjoy talking to these guys about all these big things. So just my closing thoughts about everything we talked about. Christianity being true depends on 2 things, as I've said before. Question 1, does God exist? Question 2, did Jesus rise from the dead? If those 2 things are true, it doesn't matter if there's contradictions in the Gospels or things in the Old Testament we don't understand. None of that matters because Christianity still would be true because God raised Jesus from the dead. If God exists and God rose Jesus from the dead. So if those things are true, Christianity is true. I'd leave with that. And then plugging my stuff. You can follow the YouTube channel Adherent Apologetics. Be sure to subscribe. I talk with a lot of like Christian philosophers and scientists about all these really big questions and theologians and such. You can also subscribe to the audio version via podcast. It's Adherent Apologetics. Lots of great interviews. We respond to skeptics from time to time. We did something with Rationality Rules just a couple of nights ago about the argument from limits. And then I am on TikTok, and I guess that's how people know me now. But I'm not a big TikToker, but you can follow me Adherent Apologetics on TikTok, and a lot of responding to questions if you have like questions for me, or you can just I respond to like skeptics or whatever. And then if you have any questions, feel free to DM me on Twitter or email me adherentapologetics@gmail.com or DM me on Instagram. I'd love to talk with you about these big things. So sorry that took a little bit longer than I expected, but it's been so much fun. So thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you so much. And that's it. Thanks everyone for watching. We appreciate all of the viewers, all the super chats. So thank you everyone for watching, for asking questions. And thank you again, Zach, and I guess Jeff too. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's been so fun, everyone.
Have a good